when we come to John 13, to the end of our Lord's public ministry. We've been working through this chapter now for several weeks, John chapter 12 and then chapter 13 now. And you might recall that John gives us a summary of Jesus' ministry in chapter 12, verse 44 to 50. That's really a summary of his public ministry. And then in John chapter 13, Jesus now focuses solely on his disciples. He's wanting his disciples to be prepared for his soon departure. And Jesus lovingly reveals about himself so much to his disciples in this discourse. It's the last evening of ministry before the cross, and the content that John gives them in chapter 13 is mostly unique to this gospel, actually. You can't find this in Matthew, Mark, or Luke. Its focus is on the hour of glorification and Jesus' love, which was immediate, it's faithful, and it's enduring. It also demonstrates that Jesus was in control. Look at chapter 13, verse 3. Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he had come from God, and he's going back to God. In other words, Jesus knew everything that was going on. He knew all the details. He knew the big picture that's happening. And when John brings us then right into that room with Jesus and his disciples, and Jesus lays aside his outer garments, he pours water into a basin, and then he washes each disciple's feet. And of course, this demonstration of love is Jesus says in verse 7, do you know what I'm doing? Do you understand what I'm doing? He says, afterward, you will understand. And what Jesus did, when he did this, he did it in full understanding. Verse 11, for he knew who was to betray him. That was why he said, not all of you are clean. Even so, he voluntarily washed each disciple's feet. And you can imagine when he would come to a guy like Judas and he's washing his feet and what's going on in Judas's own heart, the one who's going to betray him. And then Jesus teaches his disciples in verse 15 that what he has done is actually an example for them, and it's a way of blessing. I have given you an example that you should do as I have done to you. Verse 16, truly, truly, I say to you, a servant is not greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. If you know these things, blessed are you if you do, if you do them. I'm not speaking of all of you. I know who I'm chosen. But the scripture will be fulfilled. He who ate my bread has lifted his heel against me. I am telling you this now before it takes place, that when it does take place, you may believe that I am he. But one of the things that was important for Jesus to focus on was preparing his disciples for what was going to happen. They had followed him most of their life up to this point, actually, or several years, I should say, month after month, and they left their homes, they left their belongings, they left everything when he said, follow me. And now Jesus is basically saying to them, I'm leaving you. You cannot follow me. And everything's coming to an end for these men. Their dreams, their ideas of what the future held. I mean, think back how they even talked. Like, who's going to sit on his right hand? Who's going to sit on his left hand? All these ideas that they're spinning around as they're going around talking. And of course, Jesus is guiding and correcting. Nonetheless, all of that's crashing down as Jesus is saying, I'm going somewhere and you can't go where I'm going. And so Jesus prepares them for his departure, and he does so in chapter 13, verse 31 and following. And really does so all the way through chapter 17. Now, chapter 14 might be a place that you think that this discourse begins. Let not your hearts be troubled. Believe in God, believe also in me. But actually, this discourse could be argued that it starts really in verse 31, the beginning of our text today. Verse 31 says that when he had gone out, referring to Judas, Jesus said, now. So in chapter 13, verse 30, you see this. Immediately he went out. It was night. Judas goes out into the night's darkness. And at that point, Jesus turns to his disciples and he begins to address them. And although there is much to experience for them, there will be ones whom the Spirit himself will guide in faithfulness. So the traitor's dismissed, supper's over, everything's been put into motion, nothing's a surprise to Jesus, and John, by inspiration of the Spirit, allows us to eavesdrop in so to speak, to listen to this conversation as Jesus teaches and prepares his disciples for what they would endure while he's gone. And so we have 8 verses to look at what this entails. Let's look at verse 31. And when he had gone out, Jesus says, now is the Son of Man glorified, and God is glorified. Now look at verse 32. Do you see a pattern? If God is glorified in him, God will also glorify him in himself and glorify him at once. You probably notice that this has something to do with glory. It keeps showing up, right? And Jesus knew all things were going to happen on every level. He would give up his life. No one would take it from him. And this hour was the hour now that the Son of Man is to be glorified. And in this hour, the cross would display that glory. Now, John uses this title. You see the title he's using. He says, the Son of Man. John uses the title, Son of Man, very interestingly because when you look outside the New Testament, this title is always associated with glory. For example, you have Daniel chapter 7. We've looked at this text in recent months, but you may need to turn there if so. Daniel chapter 7, verse 14, the Son of Man came to the Ancient of Days, and he was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, and all peoples, nations, and language should serve this Son of Man. But within the Synoptics, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, the title Son of Man is often associated not with glory, but suffering. In fact, one of the key verses we think about is Mark chapter 10, verse 45, when it says that even the Son of Man came not to be ministered unto, but to minister and to give his life a ransom for many. And so you can see this as a theme of the book of Mark. And so what we find, though, in John is that the themes of glory and the themes of suffering converge. For example, in John chapter 12, one chapter back, maybe you just turn one page over, in verse 23, it says, and Jesus answered them, John 12:23, the hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. Well, what does that look like? Verse 24. Truly, truly, I say to you, unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains alone, but if it dies, it bears much fruit. And so you have this convergence of glory and suffering in John. And John states that God is glorified in Jesus, and God's unique excellence is made known. And people give him honor through their life and through the work of his Son. And so John communicates this is happening in the very beginning of the book, right? John 1:14. The Word became flesh, and he dwelt among us, and we saw it. We saw the glory as of the only Son from the Father. In other words, you see the Father when you see the Son. And it looked like this. It's full of grace and truth. And so you have verse 32 in our text, John 13:32. If God is glorified in him, God will also glorify him in himself and glorify him at once. So John's gospel uses a form of the word glory 23 times. 5 of them are right here in verses 31 and 32. So what is Jesus' glory? Well, what is glory? Well, glory can have the sense of honor, weight, substance. For example, somebody who is honorable has glory. Someone who is weightiness based upon their position has glory. But there's another nuance of this word as well. For example, what is the glory of an eagle? Other than the fact that it soars in the air like really no other bird. Or what is the glory of the Pacific Ocean? Other than the fact that it expands across the globe like no other body of water. The glory of something is its unique excellence. And so the glory of God is that there is actually no one like him at all. Part of what is the glory of God is that in the God-man, where God is 100% God, 100% man, the incarnation, the Word became flesh, and we looked at it. We saw this God-man, and we beheld the glory of the only begotten Son of the Father. Part of the glory of God is that in the God-man, this one who's 100% God and 100% man, there is no one like him at all on earth. And of course, he is the only one that can accomplish what mankind cannot accomplish, and that is salvation. So he is the glory of God. There's no other hope except for the God-man. And we beheld it, John says. And in Exodus 16, God promised that people would see his glory. The glory of God is the visible expression of his unique excellence. And when people see it, they are prompted to give him glory. Whoa, look at God. Look at that fire. Or look at how he's moving us. And that prompts people to give glory and honor and worship to this God. So how did God appear to man in the New Testament? Well, God did so through displaying his unique excellence in his Son, Jesus Christ. And so Jesus perfectly reveals the Father to human beings. And in doing so, he brings glory to God. One page over, perhaps, in John chapter 17, you read in verse 4, I glorified you on the earth, having accomplished the work that you gave me to do. So Jesus comes, he knows he has a work given to him by the Father, and he's doing this, and in so doing, he is glorifying God the Father. And Jesus perfectly reveals God to us because he is the exact imprint. He's the exact representation of God's perfect and holy nature, as chapter 1 tells us. So the question we have then today is, how does Jesus' death and his resurrection fit within the context of the glory of God? I mean, how is it that Jesus could be mistreated and murdered, and in so doing actually reveal God's character? And of course, God's unique excellence. Because John is quite insistent in verse 31 of our text, John chapter 13, where he's actually giving him glory through all these things. The Son of Man will be glorified, and God is glorified in him. Well, one author and former pastor answers it this way, quote, now bringing to a climax a theme developed throughout the gospel, this Gospel of John, the evangelist makes it clear that the supreme moment of divine self-disclosure, the greatest moment of displayed glory, was in the shame of the cross. And that is the primary reason why the title Son of Man is employed here. End of quote. The reason he could say it is that that there's really no better way or no better place you can look to understand God's character than the unique excellence revealed by God in the cross work that Jesus accomplished. Against the backdrop of the cross, this terrible, gruesome thing of suffering, you can most clearly recognize his honor and his glory, that he doesn't belong there. And in one respect, the cross is the Himalayas of God's revelation to mankind. It's the high point against the startling backdrop of sin. And in Jesus' death, we learn an abundance of God's excellence and holiness. As well, we learn God's love, we learn God's mercy, we learn God's justice in the cross. We learn about God's grace in the cross, his sovereignty, his righteousness, his humility, his patience, and his wisdom. You really cannot know or understand God from a human perspective, from the God-man perspective, without the cross. And the way that you are transformed into Christ-likeness is through the gospel itself. And so the cross helps us better understand God and therefore better worship God. And when our worship grows cold, where do we go? Well, we go to the gospel, don't we? We go to the cross. And true God-honoring worship defines appropriate passion, and it anchors it in the word-centered biblical truth of how we ought to think so that our passions can be guided into true worship. And so truth finds its common place in the gospel. It is the grand central station of our life as Christians that provides both the boots, the health, and the map of the Christian life. So look at it in verse 32. It says, if God is glorified in him, and then God will also glorify him in himself. Well, verse 33 has a lot of glorification and glory in it, doesn't it? But the significance of the verse is that it actually presents the obverse side of what you find in verse 32. God is glorified and the Son is glorified in the Father's glorification. And that glorification is immediate, it says. He will glorify him at once. The Father expects to glorify the Son at once. That is the death and exaltation which is pending. And you have this parallel in chapter 17, right? I already alluded to it, but in chapter 17, verses 4 and 5. I glorified you on the earth. Jesus is praying to the Father. I glorified you on the earth, having accomplished the work that you gave me to do. Now look at verse 5. John 17, verse 5. And now, Father, glorify me in your own presence with the glory that I had with you before the world existed, before all of this ever existed. And so God is glorified in Jesus' temporal obedience, his sacrifice, his death, his resurrection, etc. And Jesus is also glorified in this and in this eternal relationship he has with the Father, where the incarnate Word will return to the Father. So all of this is going somewhere as we move into these following verses. Verse 33 now. Little children, yet a little while I'm with you, you will seek me, just as I said to the Jews, so now I also say to you, where I'm going you cannot come. Now verse 33, Jesus explains that the Jews cannot go where he's going, and you can tell Jesus' compassion and his care for his disciples because he actually uses a word that's found nowhere else in John. He says little children, and this word children here is unique in this place to John in his gospel. And in John chapter 8, Jesus told the Jews that he was going away, that they could seek him, but they would not find him. Of course, the Jews immediately think, well, you're going to go away. And they knew he must have meant something about death because they almost started accusing him of the idea of suicide or the fact that he'll kill himself in chapter 8, verse 22. And of course, that's not the case. Jesus wasn't planning on doing that. But they did understand that he was talking about something really significant, that he's going away, that there is a death that's going to happen. And in John chapter 13, Jesus is talking about the physical impossibility now that he's going to the cross without the disciples. And in chapter 14, verses 2 and 3, Jesus' disciples can go there as he's cannot go there as he's preparing a place for them, but they will be able to be there eventually when it's finished. And so it's a spiritual impossibility then for the Jews to go where he's going. He's alluding to how he talked about the Jews, but the physical impossibility is for the disciples to go now where Jesus is going as he goes to the cross. And so he says, you will seek me just as I said to the Jews, so now I say to you, where I'm going, you cannot come. And that brings us to verse 34, where it says this, a new commandment I give to you, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you are to love one another. Now, everything is funneling down as he begins to this point, and then from this point, it's going to fan out throughout the entire discourse. What you're finding here, actually, is an introduction to everything Jesus is going to say through chapter 17. So what I'd like you to do is imagine that you are going to go away. You are going to go away from Beth Haven. Maybe you're going to move overseas. You're going to go back maybe to a place you've been or in a different state or whatever it is, but you are no longer going to be a member here at Beth Haven. You are no longer going to live in the upstate. You're no longer going to be with us now where you served and worshiped together with us for many years perhaps. And you were never going to see Beth Haven again or its members. And then as we're here in that final service, you're here and someone says, hey, would you just give a testimony? In fact, we say, yeah, why don't you just come up here and speak to the congregation? What would you admonish the congregation in that moment? What would you exhort them to continue to do? Well, maybe you would ask various individuals and maybe you would say, make sure you have sound doctrine. Make sure you keep supporting missionaries and really have a focus on the Great Commission. Make sure you don't neglect prayer in your prayer meetings. Well, all that's really good and really important, but what would Jesus have said if he stood here? Well, the scripture actually leaves us with no doubt, doesn't it? No doubt at all what's in Jesus' mind and what was actually most important of all. Not that the other things I mentioned were unimportant. Sound doctrines is very important. In fact, those things they're significant to the life of the church. But Jesus chooses to elevate one idea. And this is something that he focused on with his disciples and would continue to do so in the discourse. What was so significant or essential that he would relate to them before his departure? In verse 34, he calls it a new commandment. A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another. And so he says this to them. Someone has said that the new command is simple enough for a toddler to memorize and appreciate, but profound enough that the most mature believers are repeatedly embarrassed at how poorly they comprehend it and put it into practice. Love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. And of course, really in some ways the command is not a new command. The Mosaic covenant had mandated two love commandments, right? Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength. Deuteronomy talks about loving your neighbor as yourself. Jesus taught in Matthew and other places, Paul reflects on this, that all the law and the prophets are summed by two commands that we looked at in our call to worship. And John himself can also recognize that in certain respects, this is not a new command at all. As you think of his epistle in 1 John chapter 2, verses 7 and 8. So then, why then should he report that this is new? What's going on here with this new commandment? Well, the newness is the focus on the standard itself. Look at it in the text. A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another. And then look at those words. Here's the standard. Just as I have loved you. And isn't that what everything that Jesus is doing in chapter 13 when he's washing their disciples' feet? How he's actually living among them every single day, how he's healing and giving attention to those who need it, how he attracts people, how he makes time for people, how he makes time for little children, how he responds to people's needs, how he seems to never be in a hurry. He's going somewhere, but he looks up at a tree, he says, hey, I'm going to go to your house. His whole mission was characterized by love. He had just washed these men's feet. He had just let the betrayer go. And now he tells them that this is an example for them to do for others. And he sets the standard really high with his new commandment that they love one another. But then here it is, just as he has loved them. Something that they will only understand more perfectly in the days ahead. And the months ahead, as we go to Pentecost and to all the giving of the Spirit, all these things that are happening, they're more fully grasp really what this love is. Would you ever guess that Jesus would make this the single greatest distinctive? That we follow him in this way that he has loved his own, and that we love one another like Jesus loved us? Are you actually comfortable with this? I mean, this can make us feel uncomfortable. For example, Richard Baxter, a Puritan preacher, made a statement that he would just as soon be a martyr for love as for any doctrine in the creed. Does that make you uncomfortable? Well, let's just try ourselves to think through this. If someone claimed to be a Christian, they came to our congregation, do you think it would be essential that they held to the doctrine of the Jesus deity? Is there any doubt about that? Hopefully not, right? There's no doubt about that at all. Okay, how about this? Would we expect that someone who calls themselves a Christian, that they would believe in Jesus' substitutionary death on the cross? Yeah, there should be no doubt about that at all. Or the bodily resurrection of Jesus Christ. Okay, would you wonder if a person who does not love, that they are a true Christian? That's the level that Jesus places on this. In fact, if you'll hold your place in John 13, let's go to John's epistle in 1 John. And in 1 John chapter 4, this is all the way at the end of your New Testament, Hebrews, James, 2 Peter's, 1 John 4, verses 7 and 8 read this way. Beloved, 1 John 4, 7. Beloved, let us love one another. Do you see it? For love is from God, and whoever loves has been born of God and knows God. Anyone who does not love does not know God. There it is. Anyone who does not love does not know God, because God is love. Jesus Christ is love. Not because he had a ministry or he chose to do that or this would accomplish this earthly ministry and this is how he made things happen. Jesus was loving because that's who Jesus is. It's actually part of his nature. So when we go about doing good and caring for people, is it like Christ who goes about doing good and caring for people? Because this is actually who he is as a person. And so Jesus is in the upper room and he's telling his disciples that you need to love as I have loved you. And that's challenging for anyone. And that's the point. Because anyone would who pursues that type of Christ-like character is demonstrating a supernatural work of God in their life. And if you're in 1 John 4, you can just turn back a page to 1 John 3, where it reads in verse 9 that no one born of God makes a practice of sinning, for God's seed abides in him, and he cannot keep on sinning because he has been born of God. Verse 10, by this it is evident who are the children of God and who are the children of the devil. Whoever does not practice righteousness is not of God, nor is the one who does not. What? Do you see it? Does not love his brother. The standards are set very high. And that's the whole point if you're in this upper room discourse where Jesus is preparing them for spirit-filled living, to live as he lived, to make choices like he made. And they can only do this if they abide in him. And that's why you're going to have that in chapter 15, because it doesn't work otherwise. It doesn't work unless you're reliant on the Spirit of God like Jesus Christ was reliant on the Spirit of God. And this is where the rubber meets the road, isn't it? It's in our love for one another. It's more than just the fellowship. Or as the little poem says, something like, to live with the saints above, oh, that will soon be glory. But to live with the saints that we know below, now that's another story. And this text in John 13 challenges that kind of thinking. The kind of thinking that says, I will simply love who I get along with or care with those who seemingly make sense to me or are easy to love for me. And there's no question that this is challenging with relationships. And harm or injury can be done against one another, but that's why our Bibles provide guidance how to deal with that. How to forgive one another, how to restore relationships, how to have the gospel do its work through challenging times and challenging situations. Are we willing to lean into these type of things? Does our love for one another compel us to deal with these things in a scriptural way so that there's no bitterness left over? So that we don't need to hold a grudge, that we can sit with one another in humility, that we can show genuine Christ-like love. Well, we're not supposed to just do that in a sense where we do it by the law. You know, the law says we'll do it 7 times. No, we've got to do it by the Spirit. The Spirit says 70 times 7. And that's totally not natural. And that's why it's such a beautiful testimony of Jesus Christ, and it displays his unique excellence. I'm told that Amy Carmichael first went to the field of Japan, and that when she landed there in that country, that she got acquainted with some of the missionaries. And she was dismayed at their attitude toward one another. And as she discussed this with an older missionary one day as they walked along, one of the older missionaries expressed surprise at her perspective. And he said, well, you didn't expect that all the missionaries would love each other, did you? But that's exactly what she did expect, because that's exactly what our Lord expects. Love doesn't dwell on injuries received. It doesn't dwell on evil. It rejoices. It bears all things. It believes all things. It hopes all things. And if sinned against, it endures all things. You know who this sounds like? It sounds like Christ. And the love that he had for us. So here's the new commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. So as a believer, can you begin to put your name in a chapter like 1 Corinthians 13? Do you hear your name there? Love is patient. Love is kind. Love does not envy or boast. Do you still hear your name? It's not arrogant. It's not rude. It doesn't insist on its own way. Does this rhyme with your life? It's not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice at wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth. It bears all things, it believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends. It's exactly what Jesus did. He loved them to the end. And so the standard distinguishes Christ followers. That's exactly what it did. It's not just that the standard is Christ and his love. More, it's a command designed to reflect the relationship of love that exists between the Father and the Son. Chapter 17, we've already alluded to. Designed now to bring the members, the ones that Christ dies for, into this fellowship, this Trinitarian fellowship by the Spirit. And in so doing, John chapter 13 is enjoyed. What is John chapter 13, verse 35? By this, all people will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. So I think what's actually happening here is you have this glory. The Son of Man is going to be glorified, and he's going to do that, and there's this sense where he is going to be glorified. The Father's going to be glorified through this, and then the Father himself is going to, or the Father's going to glorify him in himself. That's this Trinitarian relationship, this unity within the Trinity, that there's this glory that is given to themselves, and he's inviting us into this. Will you be part of this? Will you love like this? Will you be connected to us by the Spirit? And of course, we're looking at this few verses, but this is the discourse. This is the sermon, the larger sermon where we're going. 14, 15, 16, 17 of John. And it's at that moment that you have this transition. You could say it's an interruption from joining Trinitarian fellowship to Simon Peter. Look at verse 36. Lord, where are you going? Jesus answered him, where am I going? You cannot follow me now, but you will follow me afterward. And Peter misses the whole point that Jesus is making and moves back to verse 31. Where are you going, Lord? Why can't I follow you now? I'll lay down my life for you. And Peter, in spite of his claim, did not have the power to live anything like how Jesus is living for Peter. And Jesus reveals to Peter that he will actually deny him. Verse 37, Peter said to him, Lord, why can't I now follow you? Why can't I follow you now? I will lay down my life for you. And Peter is claiming to do what the Lord has done for him. He's claiming to have come to a point that he himself is like Christ. You can talk about this standard, but Peter talks as if he'd already arrived at the standard. And then the Lord responds. Verse 38. Will you lay down your life for me? And of course, if you connect that to where he's calling him a little child, verse 33, he's doing this in a very caring way. But then he says, truly, truly, I say to you, the rooster will not crow till you have denied me 3 times. The truth that Jesus gave to Peter is that he had actually not begun to love like Jesus was talking about in the preceding verses. He hadn't even gotten there. He hadn't gotten to first base, if you will. And we look at Peter perhaps with disappointment, but isn't this so often our own experience that without the Lord and his Spirit, we are without any power too? We're no different than Peter. Peter's like, oh, I'm gonna lay my life down. And the danger in any message like this, when you look at it regarding the love of Christ or how am I doing, or connecting my name to 1 Corinthians 30, the danger is that we would walk away and we'd say, oh man, I just got to live, I got to live the Christian life better. That would be the wrong conclusion that you would come to today. Or if you feel beaten up like, wow, that's not me, somebody else maybe can do that, that would be the wrong conclusion that you would come to today. The right conclusion is found in the gospel of Jesus Christ. That on our best day of victory, it's only because of the gospel of Jesus Christ and his Spirit by which we walk that we can even have that type of victory in Christ-likeness. In our worst day of defeat and discouragement, it's the gospel that keeps relating us back to Jesus Christ. That's how it works. And so, let's not look at Peter with such disappointment. Let's understand that what Peter needed is what we need. We need Christ. I love how Paul says it in Colossians chapter 3. He says, when Christ, who is your life, appears. It's not just substitutionary atonement one time. It's like he is our life. All his life. So do you feel bad that you fail? Well, Peter failed too. What's the answer? Get your eyes and heart on Christ and the gospel. So as we look to the Lord's table today, maybe there's someone here that you realize, you know what, I think the way I've been living the Christian life, or how I've actually thought about the Christian life, is that I need to be a good person, or I need to say the right things, or I need to read my Bible, or I need to do whatever. And I don't really understand. I haven't really thought about the fact that, yeah, I know Jesus Christ pays the penalty, but I haven't really thought about the fact that it really has nothing to do with me, and I have to, by his Spirit, do these things. It's Christ in me, as we sang this morning. And so, although you might have a head knowledge, I think many of us in this room have a head knowledge, and if there's someone who doesn't know Christ, it might not be the fact that you don't know information, that Jesus Christ died on the cross some 2,000 years ago, and when he did, he paid the penalty of sin once and for all, that it's not by works of righteousness that we can gain our way to heaven or merit our way to heaven in some way, but it's only through his shed blood on the cross that we can have forgiveness of sins. You know that. But is that appropriated? That you really are not trying to earn your way to God or earn your way to pleasing him, but that you understand it really is good news. That Jesus Christ paid it all. And it's my appropriating, is just my falling on him and saying, Lord, be merciful to me, a sinner. And if you do that, he will be merciful right now. And if you say, you're my only hope, and you see Jesus Christ as your only hope, he will be your hope right now. And of course, for those that know him, and you be encouraged. You have relationships that need restoration, well, be encouraged. You have pride and sin that needs forgiveness, be encouraged, because you have the gospel. You have the only hope. You have Christ. There's no other way, but you have the way. And so you can enjoy it. And you're like, you know what? I want to do this. I want to love others just as you love me. Lord, let me follow and teach me the way. Lord, fill me with your Spirit. Let me submit to your word. Lord, change me. May I not be the same person as when I walked in here and looked at this text today. May it be the same tomorrow as I'm in the Word. May I not be the same. And Lord, would you go with me throughout the day in a dependence upon the Lord by His Spirit, hour by hour. And of course, this doesn't just have a focus on our own church here, right? This is an outward focus. This is something that actually God, by His Spirit, is doing among us, and how we are relating and how we are doing this together as a church body. But then it has this outward focus, does it not? I mean, look at verse 35. By this, all people will know that Beth Haven, that you are actually my disciples, that I am the shepherd of this church. I'm the chief shepherd. If you're doing these things, by my Spirit, of course, if you have love for one another. And so let's do that. Let's enjoy that together.